On a dusty hilltop in southern Turkey, archaeologists uncovered a ring of giant carved stones and slowly realized they were looking at the oldest temple on Earth. It was raised almost 12,000 years ago, and no one can say for certain why. It rose before farming, before writing, before the wheel, built by people who were meant to be nothing more than simple hunters. And after many generations of use, its makers did something stranger still. They buried it. Its name is Gobekli Tepe, which means Potbelly Hill, after the gentle swell of the mound that hid it. And quietly, over 30 years of digging, it has rewritten the story of how civilization itself began. For a long time, the hill was overlooked. To the people who passed it, it looked like nothing more than an old cemetery and a scatter of broken stone, not worth a second glance. Incredibly, the hill had even been noted decades earlier in an old survey and quietly written off as unimportant. The carved stones poking from the soil were taken for nothing more than broken medieval grave markers. Then, in the mid-1990s, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt looked again. Where others had seen broken rubble, he saw worked stone, shaped by human hands. And he understood that what poked from the soil was only the very top of something enormous, buried beneath his feet. What he uncovered would consume the rest of his life. Beneath the hill lay great rings of massive stone pillars, standing silent in the earth where they had waited for thousands of years. Enclosure after enclosure, set one within another, each ring of stones holding a pair of even taller pillars at its very center. When the stones were finally dated, the numbers seemed impossible. The oldest parts had been carved more than 11,000 years ago, around 9,500 years before the Common Era. That is older than Stonehenge by some 6,000 years, older than the Egyptian pyramids by 7,000. When these stones were raised, the last ice age had only just loosened its grip on the world. Think of what the world was like then. There were no nations, no farms, no written words, only small bands of people scattered across a wild and recovering earth, living as their ancestors had for tens of thousands of years. And here was the truly astonishing part. The people who built this place had no farms, no villages, no pottery, no metal, and no writing of any kind. They were standing at the very threshold of the Stone Age, with little more technology than humans had carried for 100,000 years before them. They were hunter-gatherers, wandering bands who lived off wild animals and wild plants. By every rule we thought we knew, they should not have been able to build anything like this at all. Yet they did. They raised circular enclosures of towering T-shaped pillars, the largest standing over 5 meters tall and weighing as much as 10 tons or even more. Each pillar was quarried from solid limestone, shaped, hauled across the landscape, and set upright in the ground. All of it done with nothing but stone tools and human muscle. The nearest quarry sits only a few hundred meters away, and there a single pillar still lies half-cut from the bedrock, abandoned before it could ever be freed. Just moving one of these pillars would have taken many people pulling together for days. There were no draft animals to help, no metal chisels, no cranes, and no wheels. Only ropes, levers, sweat, and an iron determination. Every stage of it, from cutting the rock to standing it upright in a deep socket, had to be solved from nothing, by people who had never seen a monument, because there were none yet anywhere on Earth. And the pillars were not plain. Across their surfaces marched carved animals, foxes, boars, snakes, scorpions, and vultures, rendered with startling skill. There are spiders and wild birds and serpents that pour down the stone in great writhing knots. Almost every creature is dangerous, or wild, or both. There is not a single tame animal among them. Some of the great pillars even have arms carved along their sides, with hands meeting at the front, as if the stones themselves were vast, watching beings. The two great pillars at the center of each ring may have been just that, figures standing face to face, the focus of whatever happened here in the dark. And the work is not crude. The animals stand out in bold, rounded relief, carefully shaped and full of life. These were the creations of confident, practiced hands working in solid rock. To raise all of this, hundreds of people must have come together, organized themselves, and worked toward a single shared purpose. And then they had to be fed while they did it. And there are signs of enormous feasts here. The butchered bones of countless wild animals, and great stone basins that some researchers believe may once have held fermented grain. People may have come from far and wide to gather, to feast, and perhaps even to drink together. If that is true, then some of the oldest brewing in the world may have happened right here, not to slake a thirst, but to bind a crowd together in the shadow of the stones. For scattered bands of hunters, that is a staggering feat of cooperation, and they did it not to build homes, but to raise something that no one seems to have lived in. There are no clear signs of ordinary daily life in the oldest enclosures. No proper houses, no normal hearths, none of the warm clutter of a place where people simply lived. Whatever this place was, people gathered here for something far beyond mere survival. They came, they built, they carved, and then, at the end of the day, they walked away again, back out into the wild. And so it earned its title, the world's first temple, a sacred place built before the first farm and before the first town. And that single idea turns the old story of civilization on its head. We always believed it happened in one fixed order. First, people settled down to farm. Then, with full storehouses, their numbers grew and villages swelled into towns. And only much later, with time and wealth to spare, did those towns raise temples and imagine gods. Religion, in that story, was a luxury, something you could only afford once the harder work of survival was done. Gobekli Tepe suggests it may have been the other way around. The need to gather, to worship, to build together may have come first, and farming followed afterward, to feed the crowds that the gathering kept drawing in. In other words, it may not have been bread that built the temple. It may have been the temple that demanded bread. And it may be no accident that some of the world's earliest farmed grains have been traced to these very hills. Schmidt and others suspected that the temple and the harvest were born together, here in the same handful of years. But this is still argued over. Some archaeologists believe the people of Gobekli Tepe were already growing or tending grain when they raised the stones. Others insist they were true hunters to the last. The honest answer is that we do not yet know which came first. What the carvings do reveal is what filled these people's minds, and much of it seems to circle around death. One famous pillar shows a vulture standing beside a strange, headless figure. Many researchers link the image to ancient rituals of the dead, in which bodies may have been offered up to the open sky and the birds. And among the rubble, archaeologists found fragments of human skulls, carefully carved with deep grooves, as if the dead themselves had been kept, marked, and made part of whatever rites took place here. These were people thinking hard about life, death, and whatever might lie beyond. And they were carving those thoughts into stone to outlast the ages. But the deepest mystery of Gobekli Tepe is not how it was built, or even why. It is how it ended. After many generations of use, the people did something almost no one expected. They deliberately buried it. Not one pillar, not one corner, but the whole vast complex, sealed away by their own hands. Enclosure by enclosure, they filled their great stone rings with rubble, soil, animal bones, and broken tools, until the pillars vanished completely beneath an artificial hill of their own making. It is that very fill, packed in so completely, that protected the carvings and held the stones upright for 11,000 years, so that when the soil was finally cleared away, the temple stood almost exactly as its makers had left it. This was no slow burial by drifting sand, no temple lost to the wind and the years. It was a vast, deliberate act, carried out by hand, the careful entombment of the very thing they had labored so hard to raise, and no one knows why. There is no sign of war, no sign of disaster, no flood or fire that drove them out. The burial seems calm, deliberate, almost tender. Perhaps it was a ritual closing, a way of putting a sacred place to rest when its time was finally over. Perhaps their beliefs changed and the old gods had to be sealed away. Perhaps it was meant to protect the place or to hide it from someone. Whatever the reason, the truth was buried along with the stones. For years, Gobekli Tepe seemed unique, a single, impossible wonder standing alone in the world. But that is changing, and changing fast. Across the surrounding hills, archaeologists are now uncovering a whole landscape of related sites, with their own carved pillars and their own silent enclosures. The Turkish project that studies them has a fitting name, the Stone Hills. The most striking of them, a place called Karahan Tepe, lies only a short distance away. There, the enclosures were carved straight into the living bedrock, pillars rising directly out of the stone of the earth itself. In one sunken room, more than 10 tall pillars stand carved from the bedrock floor, and a single stone head watches over them from the wall, the gaze of someone who has been waiting 11,000 years. And even at Gobekli Tepe itself, most of it has never been touched. Ground scans of the hill reveal many more great enclosures still lying buried in the earth, waiting, untouched, beneath the surface. After 30 years of digging, archaeologists believe they have uncovered only a small fraction of what is down there. The rest still sleeps under the soil, exactly where it was sealed. This was not one strange temple after all. It was the heart of a forgotten world, an entire culture of monument builders that we are only just beginning to glimpse. And still the great questions stand unanswered. What did these people believe? What did they fear or worship or hope for in the long dark before history began? What drew them together across a wild and empty land to raise these stones in the first place? And what finally moved them generations later to bury them again? We can read the animals on the pillars, but not the meaning behind them. The minds that carved them are closed to us forever. The archaeologist who first understood the site spent nearly 20 years uncovering it, and he summed up its whole strange lesson in a single line. First came the temple, and then the city. He died before the digging was finished, with the deepest questions still unsolved. And the work and the wondering go on to this day. Gobekli Tepe is, in a way, the oldest question we have ever found. A message with no words left by people standing at the very dawn of who we are. It tells us that long before cities and kings, before writing and history itself, human beings were already looking up at the sky and reaching for something greater than themselves. And the hill keeps its secret patiently, as it has for 12,000 years, and lets us wonder. If you would like to keep wandering among the world's oldest and deepest mysteries, then stay a while and let your mind grow quiet. Sleep well.